Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for joining once again Muslim Network TV. This is Canada Today show with Taha Ghayur once again with a topic that is something that we want to hear about, but we often do not because it is a taboo topic often in our communities for us to talk about. It is a topic, it deals with a type of abuse that actually happens in a space that is sacred, a space that is supposed to be safe, and a space where we actually go, people who have faith go for serenity, for peace and tranquility, and for healing. And it's a type of abuse that we in our community is often not addressed the way it should be addressed, and it's basically spiritual abuse. To address this, we have an expert today. We are joined by, and we're honored to have, and I'll be introducing her her to you in just a moment. Uh, However, I want to start off with an interesting stat that I came across recently. According to IPSU, 8% of American Muslims have reported knowing someone who has been a victim of unwanted advances from faith leaders. Now, this is, of course, an American um stat. Chances are Canadian numbers are not going to be that far off. Today, we are joined by Dr. Ingrid Mattson, who holds the London and Windsor Community Chair in Islamic Studies at Huron University College at Western University. Previously, she was professor of Islamic Studies at Harvard Seminary in Connecticut, where she developed and directed the first graduate program of Muslim chaplains in North America. She also previously served as director of the McDonald Center of Study of Islam and Christian Muslim relations. Her writings focus on Quranic studies and as well as theological ethics and interfaith engagement. Dr. Mattson is the past president of Islamic Society of North America and is a senior fellow of the Royal Al Bayt Institute of Islamic Thought in Jordan. Today, we will discuss with her the topic of spiritual abuse and a special project that she has founded herself, mashallah, and has a team that works with her, a wonderful team that works with her, and it's called the Hurma Project. So, welcome, Dr. Ingrid Mattson, Canada, today for the first time.
Thank you so much, Brother Taha. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Well, mashallah, I mean, you throughout your career, you have had a number of firsts, mashallah. We're talking about whether it's your career or your Islamic and Muslim community leadership experience from, being the first woman being president of a national organization or sort of continental organization at the time, Islamic Society of North America. You've been an advisor to the government. And of course, you have, mashallah, led as a chair and even, in fact, instituted and introduced Islamic studies programs and various university settings, alhamdulillah. So, I mean, after all this wonderful experience and various and all those various hats that you have worn, I was wondering, why was a project like Hurma Project, and we'll learn more about it specifically in just a moment, was so important to you personally to take on at this stage of your career and life?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Brother Taha. It's a good question because I've been teaching now for over 25 years, been involved with the Muslim community for over 30 years, and it's not quite the research that I expected to be undertaking at this point in my career and my service to the Muslim community. I am primarily a teacher, and I love especially to shape the next generation of Muslim scholars and teachers and chaplains. That's really where my passion lies. But as I have done that now for many years, I've always been aware that whenever we empower someone with knowledge or position or status or authority, we also have to consider how to make sure that uh, that empowerment is also being governed by ethical behavior, and that is being used to serve the Muslim community. Unfortunately, over many, many years, I've encountered different incidents. I've been consulted and asked to help support people who have been unfortunately abused or exploited by those who have religious knowledge, power, and authority. And I've tried to deal with it on a case to case basis, consult with, say, the community members who were involved or potentially could respond. But again and again, kept facing the same kind of misconceptions, the same kind of reluctance to get involved, almost a bystander kind of syndrome, and realizing that the issues were so complex and really systemic in a way that that the only way to address these issues seriously was with further research, in-depth research and study, and trying to bring in as many components of the community as possible to really speak to their own understanding and experience. This is not a one-person issue to address. It's our fard kifaya, the community obligation, and I'm happy to take on the responsibility to help fulfill that community obligation. Because I love this community. I love the Muslim community. I love Islam, and I have full confidence that we have the capacity, and Islam has the principles for us to be able to address these issues in a serious way.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and your passion for this project. So let's talk about the word hurma, or the concept of hurma, which is a very interesting and it's an interesting and unique Arabic word that describes the idea of protecting people and keeping people safe, and of course in this context in a religious setting and institution, Islamic institutional setting. So tell us what to you, based on your research, I mean, what does hurma mean for a lay person when they hear something, a word like that, and when they hear about your project?
Right. So so all Muslims know the word haram, meaning the sacred enclosure or the sacred space of Mecca and Medina. All Muslims know the word haram, meaning the limits beyond which it is prohibited to go. So hurma is from that same root. It is related, and it means the sacred inviolability of the person, of the human person. So it means that each person is surrounded by limits that should not be transgressed, and that person is the embodied person, so their physical body. It also is their honor, their dignity, and it also includes their their property as well. So it's the person and what is theirs that is enclosed by this protective, sacred protective layer. And if we consider that this word, perhaps most Muslims have encountered the word hurma, if ever at all, in the context of the bodies of the dead. So we know that when our beloved brothers and sisters in Islam die, that we are required to be very gentle with their bodies, that even though they have died, that still their bodies have a right to be covered, to be treated gently, that we can't talk about, say bad things about them. And that's the hurma of the deceased person's body. So if we have all of these obligations to protect and be gentle with the body of the dead, what about the living? So I really want us to think about that, about how profound this obligation is upon each one of us and as communities to, to protect and honor the dignity and safety and security of each, not just believer, but Hurma goes to all of the children of Adam, all of Banu Adam, every human being, in fact.
Mm-hmm. That's a beautiful analogy. Thanks for sharing that. That really hits home. I think that's a very, very powerful analogy. So there's an element, and you guys talk about this, of responsible leadership when you talk about hurma. And of course, now we're talking about the context of religious leadership. So from your perspective, what is the relationship between a responsible leadership and the idea of hurma?
Right. So, why do we have leaders in the first place? Why do we seek to have people of knowledge live in our communities among us? Why do we consult them? Why do we bring an imam to come and serve as the full time leader of our mosque congregations when any Muslim can actually lead prayer? We do that because we understand that in our religion that that the primary means for us to really learn our religion is through the people who carry within them that knowledge and have tried to discipline themselves with a life of service. So there's that formation, that akhlaq, that tarbiyah. We seek to have a role model who themselves is embodying the role model of the Blessed Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is a religion where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose to both send us the book, uh, Quran, Revelation, and as well to send us a role model through the Blessed Prophet Muhammad sallallahu. So that person who carries within him or her this knowledge and this character, this good character, this beautiful akhlaq is so important. As human beings, we primarily learn from other people and we're influenced by their behavior, how they act. Um, and so whenever we put someone in a position of knowledge and authority, and we turn to them and we give them this trust, this amana to teach us and help us develop our God given capacities, that person has a much heavier burden than the rest of us. We have a right to expect that their behavior will be not perfect, every human makes a mistake, but that they will be someone who we really do hold to a higher standard in terms of their behavior. And so that really is where sometimes we get confusion in the Muslim community. How do we do that? If this is someone who knows more than us or who we believe has embodied or demonstrated more religiosity, how at the same time can we possibly be the ones to correct them or hold them accountable or even know if they've done something wrong? Um, and this is particularly confusing when an individual has been the recipient of abuse or exploitation by that leader because, here they are, they've placed their trust. Oh, this is my teacher, and I should be respectful to my teacher and listen because my teacher has more knowledge. But then if that teacher crosses a line that I know is not, that they're not supposed to cross or that we've been taught they're not supposed to cross, now I'm in a state of complete confusion. Don't know what's happening.
Mm-hmm. So, last year, the Hurma Project did a wonderful 3-day conference on this subject and to collect research, in fact, on this very topic involving Muslim spaces. So I was wondering what were some of the societal reasons that were highlighted, especially for I guess a key motivation for the Hurma Project to continue working on this issue. I mean, and what are and at the same time, I was wondering if there were any specific examples that you want to share regarding what does this abuse mean when we hear spiritual abuse, when we're talking about crossing that boundary. What are we talking about? Is this something? Does it have something to do with, you know, exploitation of somebody's beliefs, and just mocking somebody's faith, or manipulating them in some way? Or are we talking about something, as you talked about, physical, abuse of sort, or it could be sexual? So I wanted to hear what exactly are we talking about, and what were some of the societal reasons that came up in those studies and the conference that you guys had last year.
Right. Well, I'll tell you, the reason why we decided to have this research project is that I'm also learning about these things. My training is in Islamic law and ethics and in Quran. So I'm not an expert in all of these areas. But I know that we do have, alhamdulillah, we're very blessed that at this point in history, we have Muslims in our community who have now developed great expertise in areas like mental health, therapy, sociologists, psychologists, those who examine congregational studies. There are many. We have people who have really delved into these subjects. So by bringing these people together, and these experts together, we can all learn together. So I have been learning, and I continue to learn as I have conversations with experts about these things. Now, the term spiritual abuse, some people like it, some people don't like it. It sounds kind of vague. My definition or my understanding of it is that it is um, to use when a person uses religious knowledge or status or authority, or even concepts in a way that exploit or abuse other people. So it's a kind of layer on top of the abuse that's happening. So say, for example, one example might be um, someone who works in an Islamic organization, and they go to their employer or their supervisor at this Islamic organization and say, um, I want to take a day off. I want to take one of my sick days because I'm not feeling very well. Or they might say, I've really been working more than my 8 hours, and I have no problem doing that, but I also need to spend some time with my family. So I really prefer that I confine my work to the hours that we agreed upon. And then their supervisor turns around and says, hey, what's wrong? You should check your intention. This is an organization that is for the sake of Allah, for the sake of the Muslims. This is an Islamic organization. Aren't you being selfish? So they're using Islamic concepts or Islamic identity to actually engage in a kind of abusive labor practices. So that's one example. It could also be demanding of people, say in a group, say there's a third space or a space that meets, to study with a spiritual leader, a sheikh, and that sheikh or sheikha, because it could be a man or a woman, is constantly demanding his or her students not only to spend more time, but to give more and more of their money and donations to support the practices, and maybe without any kind of transparency where this money is going. And knowing that they're really taking it away from needs that they have or their family has. And then, of course, there's also um, the very unfortunate case where there may be a imam or a scholar who uses the teaching space or the congregational space to actually keep their eye open for women who may be they can approach for a intimate relationship. And even if that intimate relationship is framed in terms of marriage, there can be a violation because what we hear about are these marriages are kept secret, or they're done really without the full consent of the woman. She believes she's entering a regular marriage, and he's simply in his mind is making it a temporary marriage. But by not stating out loud that it's a temporary marriage, he avoids the strict legal requirements. But there is deception in there.
Mm.
So all of these can be different instances of spiritual abuse. What each of them share is the use of this religious knowledge or identity or language or authority to abuse or exploit a person.
Hmm. Very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing all these manifestations of violation of one's hurma. And I think some of the things we don't even think about. The way you just framed it, it was very interesting. So thank you for sharing that. Really will make a lot of us think next time we are in such settings, how we approach others, and how, of course, others approach us. Now, alhamdulillah, ever since you guys started this wonderful project, there have been quite a few other initiatives and programs, and people now talk about this a lot more, which is great, about the issue of spiritual abuse in the Muslim community. But when you started this, I would say a groundbreaking project in North America, what was the initial reaction from the Muslim community and, of course, the wider community as well?
Yeah. I was wondering that as well when I started it. I didn't know what kind of response that we would get. And I have to say that the response has been overwhelmingly very positive. So many people are, I would say, the predominant sentiment that I've received is one of relief.
Mm,
Finally, there are people who are addressing this topic. And I want to say we're not the only ones. There are other Muslim organizations, Muslim-led organizations. Most of them probably are led by Muslim women, but not all of them. Some are also led by Muslim men that are addressing this topic. And really, we need this kind of network of organizations who share knowledge and expertise to be able to address this issue. So I would say that primarily the Muslim community are happy to hear that we do have the ability to address these issues within the Islamic framework, that we have the principles, we have the values, we have the tradition, but we've been cut off from many of these, the sources of strength and knowledge for this. And we're in a bit of a, in North America or in many of the Western environments, we're in a bit of the kind of wild, we're the sort of wild, wild west,
mm,
because
mm,
we have this wonderful freedom on the one hand to have, develop communities and establish communities. But on the other hand, we have a responsibility, and we're not fully taking on that responsibility because historically, I mean, in every Muslim community in history, there always was a system of accountability.
mm,
So mosques, for example, were governed by the law of awqaf and other laws, so the law of charitable endowments. And these were supervised by the judges. So the qadi had as a primary responsibility authority to over the supervision of any mosque or school or charitable endowment. And we have many cases throughout Islamic history where complaints were brought to the judge. The judge looked into it. There was a complaint of financial malfeasance, or there was a complaint of sexual abuse, and it was raised in open court, and the judge dealt with it. we also have many cases where judges were accused of corruption, and
Mm,
those were brought to the local administrators, and they were dealt with in Madhalim courts or in through Siyasa Sharia or other aspects of the Islamic legal system, and through executive authority. So there's nothing new about ensuring accountability. But we, as a North American Muslim community, unfortunately, haven't learned how to do that yet. I mean,
mm,
we have boards, but the boards, frankly, are very often unsure about their own authority. And
mm,
so a big part of the educational process has to be not only, letting individual Muslims know about their rights, not only doing better training and having higher expectations for our teachers and imams and chaplains and others, but
mm,
also those who are going to take on the executive authority of being the board of an Islamic organization. They too need to understand really that you know this is ultimately, in any Islamic organization, their responsibility to provide that safe space. And if they don't, honestly, uh, of course, we should be mostly afraid of facing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when these things happen. There's also a legal requirement.
mm,
We see, for example, with the Catholic Church, when they've not dealt with these issues and they've covered up
mm.
these issues or simply transferred people out, that they have faced, multi-million dollar lawsuits and have had to lose, much of their property because of not responding um, to the complaints. And you can't always, you're not going to be able to prevent everything, but you certainly can respond justly when an abuse takes place.
It's interesting. I mean, over the past few years, especially 3 to 4 years, in North America, Muslim women in particular, and Muslims in general, you can see that many of them have mustered up the courage to speak out against such forms of abuses, especially when involves, probably the more extreme examples involving sexual advances or physical advances of sort. Now, I mean, why do you think people in our community are speaking out in such unprecedented ways now than they ever have been in North America?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that there are two reasons. One is because we do have more, Muslim leadership who are speaking about these things. And before we started speaking specifically about spiritual abuse, we've had, alhamdulillah, now for, many, many years, Muslims who've been talking about domestic violence and
Mm,
intimate partner violence. And this is not unrelated from that issue, because often those uh, the perpetrators will do both very often. And in
mm,
fact, domestic violence in the Muslim community often involves spiritual abuse as well, where the
mm.
abuser uses Islam to justify his or her abuse,
It's true.
right?
Yeah.
So that could be the husband telling the wife that he has the right to abuse her, or it could be, parents, a mother who could say, even, it's interesting, even to an adult child, a mother who might demand that her adult child absolutely obey her, to the detriment of that person's own marriage, for example, or family. So that kind of abuse can happen even among adults within a family if we say there's no limits. Are there no limits to obedience to parents? Are there no limits to honoring and respecting the spouse or other members of the family? This is the issue: is that wherever there are whenever there are um, relationships that involve any kind of hierarchy, parents and children or teacher and student, that yes, there's a power differential because we place a certain amount of trust in that person who has more power and authority to use that for the benefit of the individual. But those are never unlimited. And if they use that authority or power or status or position for their own benefit or in a way that is harmful to the student or child or spouse, then that is abusive. So this is just what we really have to understand. I would also say that there are Muslims, like others in general society, are speaking out more about these issues. We've seen that in all areas of life, in sports, Boy Scouts, in entertainment industry, in all sorts of areas, abuse can occur. And people are starting to speak out a little bit more because they feel that they're going to get some support. It's the same reason why we hear Muslims who are speaking out more also about anti-Black racism, about Islamophobia. These are things that maybe 20 years ago, people wouldn't speak out that much about, because if they spoke, they thought,
Mm,
one, their experience was people didn't believe them,
mm,
or it made them more vulnerable. I know many Muslims, for example, who talk about their parents, if they immigrated to Canada, say 30, 40, 50 years ago, the kind of abuse that they faced in society, they kind of swallowed it and went along
mm,
because they didn't have avenues of support. But their children and their grandchildren are not willing to put up with that. And so we know, in Canada now has officially recognized Islamophobia, alhamdulillah, as
mhm,
a reality. So it's only good if we are developing into a society that is now capable of actually listening to people talk about their experiences. And even if we ourselves have not had them, we are willing to listen and let them tell us what their experience is. I'm a white person. I'm a Muslim, but I'm a white person. And so I don't know personally what it feels like to experience anti-Black racism, but I am learning from my brothers and sisters who are Black Canadians about the racism that they've experienced. And it's my responsibility to listen and to really take seriously what they're telling me and not say, well, I have never experienced that, so it must not exist.
mm. Well, I loved all the insights you have just shared, and it's interesting you're talking about, of course, the this phenomena now being much more talked about in the wider community and a lot more awareness. Now, I just wanted to take a moment to for you to address a misconception perhaps, or a claim that people make, and you see this every now and then, that what about this idea that this thing that that you guys are just being opportunistic by riding this Me Too movement bandwagon, and there's not much substance to it, and you guys got to be careful and how you balance the rights of the accused as well as the ones who, of course, the victim. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on this, because this is something we do hear about, and again, more to clarify some of the misconceptions that are around this
Mhm.
issue of protecting people's rights, of course.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's the people who make those statements are using the same kind of techniques that those who deny Islamophobia and racism use.
Mhm.
It's deflection, denial, distraction, ad hominem attacks. So we're all familiar with those kind of techniques. Um, you could go and talk to any of the chaplains that I've taught over the years, and hear from them that we've been speaking about this ever since they began as my students. So, for example, my many of the students that I educated and trained at Hartford Seminary in the Islamic chaplaincy program, went on to form the Association of Muslim Chaplains.
Mm.
And I would recommend for your listeners to go to their website, the Association of Muslim Chaplains. They have, over the 10 years of their existence, developed first a code of ethics, and then they, a few years ago, they changed that to a code of conduct, and they continue to work on updating and improving this code of conduct, and are now working on ways um, to understand how they can actually enforce this code of conduct among their members, their chaplain members. So this is not something, we're not jumping on any bandwagon. This is
Mm.
something that we've been working on, many of us, for many, many years. And certainly, it's not enough just to have the principles or the ideals. There need to be systems of addressing violations.
Mm.
And those systems do need to be fair. They need to be fair to the accused, and they need to be fair to the complainant. Um, the problem is that, so often we don't do that work. We don't do the work of setting up these systems,
Yes.
and then a scandal breaks out, and everyone's rushing to respond to it. And it's like, if you're not prepared, of course, the response is going to be chaotic,
Mm.
and it's not going to be the just response. And in fact, in the past, I've had to deal with that. I mean, I
Mm.
remember 25 years ago being in a community in Chicago where, there was a scholar who had severely, many times, frequently abused his wife, to the point where my husband and I were woken up in the night one time, with her at our door, having run away from this man who, I'm just warning, this is going to be a very graphic description, but had held her down with a knife to her throat. Now, this was brought to the imam of the mosque, who heard all the information, who was dealing with it the best he could, but frankly, he was not trained in
Mm.
understanding, how to respond to this situation. And a few months after this happened, I was sitting in the mosque, and suddenly, I was waiting for the Jummah khutbah, and I heard a voice, and I realized it was the voice of the abuser.
Mm.
And I was just shocked, and I was frankly nauseous. Like, I really felt sick to my stomach. And afterwards, I went to the leadership, and I said, you know, I if that happens again, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say something like, you cannot do this. Do you know how painful this was to all of the women in the congregation, at least, who knew what had happened? And there was no doubt, it was no, he was arrested, and there was all sorts of knowledge about this. So what I'm saying is that, what happened in that situation, I don't feel that, I don't want to just say, oh, they don't care or anything. It's just that they never developed a system. They never
Mm.
developed a process. Someone
Mm.
did the scheduling, and there was a lack of coordination. So
Mm.
we need to have systems in place. We need to have clear, transparent expectations about behavior. There need to be complaint systems, like in any place of employment. There need to be processes in place. And then we're going to be able to have systems that are fair to both the complainant and
Mm.
the person whose conduct has been alleged to be exploitive or abusive, or has crossed boundaries.
Interesting. This is a good segue into, actually, I wanted to ask you specifically about this issue of being unmasked. A few months ago, we had a very wonderful segment and conversation with Dr. Kathy Balak and Dr. Mona Rahman on this topic. And so I wonder, and you just gave a very specific and very practical example, a real example of how so many women in particular could be men as well, who feel unmasked when they hear or they experience such incidents in their own mosques or religious spaces. So I was curious if there are any specific psychological and social impacts that you could talk to, that you're advocating, of course, against right now through this Hurma project, especially for the victims or people who witness such crimes, unfortunately.
Right. And it's just sad. It's really very, very sad when you hear stories about those people who used to love the mosque or love their Muslim community or love that space, and then have been traumatized by what's happened there. It is a wound that really does not go away, and it's very, very difficult to recover from. It makes people, in many ways, very often unable to trust anyone ever again, and it impacts people's faith. I mean, I know people who have told me personally that they simply lost their faith because of this. And what could be worse? I'd rather have the mosque just closed down than continue. What is the benefit of a place that serves as a barrier or an impediment to faith? So this is a really, really serious issue, and it's painful to me because, look, I came to Islam as an adult. I converted to Islam. I wasn't raised a Muslim. This I am so grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
Alhamdulillah.
for giving me this guidance. I mean, it's everything to me. And to see this beautiful, beautiful, faith and these beautiful teachings being used in a way to hurt people and drive them away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's something that I just can't handle. And that's why I feel so passionate about doing this work, even though it's difficult. And it's not something that anyone loves to do. Alhamdulillah, I'm a full professor. I am at the stage in my life where I could do any research I want. I can spend my time really doing whatever I want. Alhamdulillah, I'm so privileged. But I feel that, in a way, that's why I feel a responsibility to do this, because I do have the ability to choose any research or writing that I want, and that's not true of many others. I'm blessed with having many contacts in the Muslim community, people I can partner with and draw upon for their knowledge and expertise. But it's not something I would choose. If this all, if this whole problem was solved, I would love to work on some other of my passions. So, I'm doing a lot of research. I've been engaged in a lot of research on Islam and the environment and our relationship with the earth and other living beings. And I love doing that research, and I find that just like endlessly enlivening and uplifting. But someone has to do this work, and those, I see many of the, so many of my brothers and sisters who are bearing the burden of the disclosures of people, and how difficult that is. So I'm just trying to do my part to support them with this research and education. So because if we could prevent a lot of it, that would be so great. And it is possible to prevent many of these situations if we simply have more transparent systems, we have better governance systems and oversight, better training. We can't prevent all of them, but the response, it's interesting. There's that old expression, it's not the crime, it's the cover up. And really, that's what you will hear from those who have been exploited or abused. They'll say, look, we know that Muslims also can sin and can do wrong things. And as sad as it is, we also know that Muslim leaders or teachers can also commit great sins. But what is unbearable is when people, everyone else is just like, oh, covers it up or denies that it happened or minimizes it, considers it unimportant. So that's all of our responsibility, is
Absolutely.
not to be among those who are the ones who commit that, really harmful action of denial and cover up.
Awesome. And I wanted to, we have I have a series of few quick questions towards the end as we conclude, but I wanted to actually commend you for this courage that you have, mashallah, taking up this cause. If I just listening and interviewing you have a hard time even, thinking about this topic, I can only imagine what a person like you, mashallah, a leader who has experienced this for years, dealing with these kinds of issues in the community, and now advocating for this cause so publicly, what you go through. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give you all the strength and courage to continue, and resilience to continue this wonderful work, which is so close to your heart. So thank you so much for your passion and your sentiments that you just shared with us today. So I wanted to hear from you. What are some, I guess, more immediate upcoming sort of goals and initiatives of the Hurma Project that you'd like to share with us?
Mhm.
And how can more people know about the Hurma Project? Before we end with some very specific, advice from you for all of us.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for your words of encouragement, Brother Taha, and thank you for asking about that. I'm very excited that we have just completed a limited series podcast that will be released within a few weeks, inshallah. It will be released on our website, hurmaproject.com. And in this limited series podcast is a series of interviews that I and my partner in the Hurma Project, Mihad Fahmi, have conducted with various experts in the field. My partner Mihad Fahmi is a human rights and workplace lawyer. She undertakes in her professional capacity investigations into workplace abuse. So she gets called upon by hospitals and banks and churches and other organizations to come in as an external investigator when there is a complaint that's been made. And she investigates and issues a report to that organization. And she's well known in the Muslim community. She used to serve on the board of the National NCCM, National Council of Canadian Muslims. So Mihad and I have interviewed imams, chaplains, therapists, and others to try to dig deeper into understanding these dynamics. How can abuse happen if you have an adult, an adult in the congregation and an imam? Why is it that the obligation really rests with the imam or the teacher to maintain boundaries and not cross boundaries? And why does, how can a person develop an impaired or diminished capacity to consent in those kind of situations? We also talk about why it's so important for boards of mosques to understand that imams, in order to do their job well and to not cross boundaries, and we're not even talking about major crossing of boundaries, but even things like just being like annoyed or irritable with people who come and ask questions if they're overtired or they haven't had time to spend with their family. Like, there really need to be limits on the demands that we place on those who serve our community. The vast majority of those who serve our community are so sincere. They're so hardworking. They don't have to be asked to, work long hours or go further. They do that anyways, but they also are human beings who have limits. They need rest. They need to spend time with their family. They need to be able to have the income to support, or else there will be problems. So I'm really looking forward to, hearing from people, getting feedback about those interviews, because I learned so much from those conversations. And so, yes, look on our website within a few weeks, and we'll be, and it will be released on all of the, typical podcast platforms. Hurma
Mm.
Project podcast. That's very simply what it's called.
Oh, awesome. I mean, thank you for this pioneering effort, and definitely looking forward to those podcast series. And you can learn more about it at hurmaproject.com. So we encourage everybody to check it out and support this wonderful, wonderful work that you guys are doing. Now, to close off, a few things I wanted to ask you, Dr. Ingrid
Mhm.
Mattson. One was, are there any best practices or tips you would like to share for a person who is trying to heal from such abuse and had to deal with such distrust and is going through a painful process of really trying to figure out what to do next?
Yeah. I mean, first of all, they need to understand that they're not alone, that there are others who have shared that experience, and that everything they're feeling in response to it, guilt and sadness, and, because when people are abused, the people who have abused them are very good at turning the guilt around. And so I really encourage them to find those who they can really trust. Unfortunately, many of us in the general community, we don't know how to respond very well.
Mhm.
I've learned a lot about the best way to respond only because I've taken a bunch of, trainings and learned that I shouldn't be, if someone discloses to me, that I shouldn't be interrogating them or asking them all sorts of questions. Um, so disclosure, should be made to someone who really can be trustworthy, a therapist, a social worker, someone who has been trained to understand and who's there to support them. What can I say other than I'm so sorry that this has happened to you. If this has happened to you, and I'm so sorry if you haven't been believed or if people have minimized your experience. And I know that that happens to almost everyone. We know, for example, that when children are abused, that on average they disclose what happened to them 9 times before someone actually believes them. So this is a really painful part of the process. Um, we have, Nasiha helpline. We have, alhamdulillah, at this point, other agencies that are there to provide that initial support. And inshallah, the rest of us are catching up and learning about ways to be supportive and helpful.
Great, thank you so much. Now, you did talk about some of the things like having systems in place, having a grievance process, and process of complaining, and taking feedback when it comes to institutions. Are there any specific things, maybe in addition to this, or just summarizing what you talked about? Any advice for imams, community leaders, Islamic institutions you want to share so that we can prevent as much as possible such grave violations of people's rights, and Islamic rights, as well as, of course, human rights?
Well, what we know, and we hear from imams themselves, is that approximately 80% of their work is counseling
Mm,
or dealing with problems that community members bring to them. And that means that all of us should make sure that when we write a job description for what an imam should be doing, it has to include awareness of these issues. So it
mm,
doesn't mean that every imam is going to be a counselor, but there are, short courses, training courses that they can take so they know how to respond, who they can and how they can make referrals, how they can not, not make it worse when someone comes to them.
mm,
um, our imams are getting this kind of training in terms of mental health, right?
mm, mhm,
Identifying, being able to understand what does mental illness look like, and if I see that in someone, how can I help that person get the support they need? So whether it's mental health, whether it's abuse, all of these things, it should be part of the training of leadership. That includes teachers at Islamic schools, etc.
Mm.
Boards and the boards come from the community. So our communities really need to hold our boards accountable as well. We should ask them, what is the complaint process in this institution? If
Mhm.
if a student was going to complain about a teacher, or a community member was going to complain about the imam, where is that process? What is a complaint mechanism? How can you ensure that there will be confidentiality, that
Mm.
there will be objectivity? A lot of communities want to deal with these issues in-house, but they don't have the capacity. It's not, it's like we often hear, we know in the Muslim community, um, we look at what happens with complaints against the police. And
Mm.
when the police are investigating complaints against other police officers, it's only common sense. We say, well, that's not really going to work very well, right? So we should understand it's the same process in house. It doesn't mean everyone wants to cover up. It's just that when you have a relationship with someone and you have a close relationship, you just simply can't be objective
Mm.
about the evidence that you're receiving. You have that bias. You have that attachment to the person. So all of us should demand more from our institutions.
Mm. Very interesting. Thank you so much. Very, very practical. To end and conclude, one last question, maybe in 1 minute, if you can summarize, or 2 minutes. Let's give you 2 minutes. Um, if God forbid, as a common attendee of a masjid, I hear about something happened in the masjid nearby, and let's say in this case, the imam has been accused of some wrongdoing involving an attendee who happens to be female. What are, let's say, three things I should do, and what are, let's say, three things I should not do in such a case as a
Mhm.
common regular attendee of a masjid?
Right. Well, I would say that first of all, we shouldn't speculate um, about what happened, what may have happened, what didn't happen. We shouldn't gossip, and we shouldn't engage in conspiracy theories. Oh, this is some kind of, you know, spin some kind of story in our head. This religion is based on knowledge, on ilm, and we act on the base of knowledge and evidence. So if we don't know about something, then we shouldn't draw conclusions from lack of knowledge. What we should do um, is think about, if it's happening in another community, we should maybe turn to our community and say, all right, if this happened in our community, are we prepared? Are we prepared to deal with a complaint? And if not, let's start working on our own processes and procedures. We should certainly, uh, if anyone who has been directly affected comes to us and tells us that they themselves experience this abuse or exploitation, we should take it seriously. Very often, supporters say, believe those who disclose. Sometimes people don't like that word because they say, well, shouldn't we give the other person the benefit of the doubt? What I would say is that you take it seriously. People are not going to rational people are not going to come forward and say something like this, um, unless it's true in most cases or has a lot of truth in it. Why? Because the most common reaction is to not be believed. So why would you do, why would you say something when the most common reaction again and again is to not be believed and place the guilt on you? So to really take it seriously, listen to the person, and then you can ask them, how could I support you? Do you want me to go with you, to talk to someone who is an expert, who's qualified in dealing with these issues? What would you like me to do? Very often people just want a listening ear, so that they can start to, have some time and space to work out what their next step is. We definitely should not tell them what to do,
Mm.
because the reality is, in most cases, um, the even if they go report to the authorities, maybe the authorities won't respond in a good way, or maybe they have very good reasons not wanting to report because it might put them in a position of more danger. So we shouldn't tell them what to do, but definitely listen, take it seriously, and ask them, once you listen, how you could possibly support them.
Amazing. Thank you so much. You summed it up so well, Dr. Ingrid Mattson. Unfortunately, that brings us to the close of our program, for us to end here. Unfortunately, there's so much more we could have talked about and so much to unpack based on what you have just shared today. So I really hope we all take such taboo topics seriously, and have serious conversations within our own families and our communities and with our community leaderships around such topics that are often neglected for one reason or the other. So once again, Dr. Ingrid Mattson, thank you so much for your time, courage, and your passion this afternoon. And we look forward to having you more often, and want to hear and wishing all you and your team all the best with the Hurma Project.
Thank you so much, Brother Taha. I really appreciate you, discussing this topic with me. As the Prophet Muhammad said, "La haya fi din." There's no shame in things that affect our religion. So we should simply be grateful that we do have means and mechanisms of dealing with these in our religious life. Thank you for this time, and just wishing everyone out there, if anyone listening has experienced something like this, and is feeling really upset by what they've heard, please, you can find some resources for immediate support on our Hurma Project website, some places you can call for someone to listen and give you some support.
Awesome, for sure, inshallah. And by the way, there's many activists, leaders, and individuals from the community who are tuning in and listening, mashallah, commenting as well. So thanks to all the wonderful people who are joining and sharing their questions and feedback, and look forward to addressing some of those in future as well. So once again, thank you so much, Dr. Ingrid Mattson. Jazakumullah khairan.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam. Well, once again, folks, this is it for this afternoon. Would love to have had more time to discuss this in more detail, and inshallah, in future we will have more, inshallah, nuanced and detailed conversations on topics like this, as we have been for the past few months. And once again, you have been watching Canada Today with Taha Ghayur on Muslim Network TV. And wanted to also thank our wonderful team of producers, Saliha Farouk, as well as Aisha Malik, for their time on this wonderful production. And thanks to all our wonderful viewers. Once again, signing off for this afternoon, Taha Ghayur. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.